Lizzie at Minerva. Today's pattern drafting video is looking at how to create a princess seam using a dart manipulation process. So we're going to take our bodice block and we're going to look at the front bodice pattern piece only, and we're going to be adapting that to create a really flattering and complementary princess seam. As always, with this series, you're going to need your standard pattern drafting tools. That includes your own bespoke bodice block, which we drafted in a previous video. This video series is looking at just how to rotate the darts around to create different shapes, fully fitted shapes, using your bodice block. What we're not doing is creating a finished top. That's something that we'll look at in later episodes. And we're breaking down the pattern drafting tutorials into chunks of topics. So we're looking at how to rotate the darts. In this one, we'll be looking at how to do sleeves, how to add collars and cuffs at a later date. So this is just looking at dart manipulation only. By creating a whole load of different series, we're then allowing you to pick and choose which aspects you want to create your very own unique garment. Great. Okay, so on our block we have one waist dart and we have one bust dart. So what we're effectively wanting to do is to take out that volume and create two separate panels. Now what we really do want is for the dart to kind of come along, and either it can go up to the shoulder or it can go into the arm side. It doesn't really matter where you want to put it, but for the purpose of this video we're going to send that up to the shoulder point midway along. To start off with, grab your pattern drafting ruler and find the midpoint of your waist dart. Draw a line from that midpoint all the way up to the apex. I then want you to create new dart lines from the bottom of the dart up to the apex. Now when we drafted this block we made sure that the point of our dart was 2 centimeters from the apex, but we're just sort of relocating the top of the dart to the apex. And what this does is it means that both darts are now meeting at the apex in that one particular space. Okay, we'll come back to that bit in a minute. The next thing to do is to find the midpoint along the shoulder. Mark that point along the shoulder seam and then draw a line from that point to the apex. What I would also recommend that you do is that you just add a couple of references. Just add a little line halfway along that line that you just drawn, which is going to act as a notch when you come to put the two pieces together at a later date when we sew it. The next thing we're going to do is to rotate that dart around to this location here. Okay, so first of all, cut out the volume of the existing dart. Next, cut along the line you've just drawn from the shoulder to the apex, making sure to leave a pivot point at the apex. Remove the volume from the original bust dart and then close up that dart. So we've taken out that volume and we've just shifted it around into the shoulder seam. The next thing that we want to do is to cut out this dart down here. So to start off with, I'm just going to cut down one side, following my red line that I drew up to the apex. Now at this point, I'm actually just going to pivot it over. You can see it's lining up nicely like that. And I actually want to add a little notch mark about halfway along this line too. So when I come to sew it together, I'm going to know that at that point it should be joining together nicely. Excellent. Okay, so you can now cut out the remaining side of that dart, making sure to follow your new line all the way up to the apex. Lovely. Okay, look at that. We've got some really fun shapes we can create with that. What we're going to do though now is we're actually going to slip through the apex completely, destroying that pivot point, and just offset one piece from the other. Okay, we've now got two pattern pieces effectively now, and we're going to be joining them together at this point. However, we have got quite a sharp point here, which is, angled, because obviously there were two straight lines that met at that point. And what we want to create is a nice soft curve going all the way down our bodice. We don't want like a sharp angle. So take your pattern drafting ruler and just try and soften that curve just slightly. Now, from the beginning of the curve, which was here, and the end of the curve, which was here, just mark the beginning and end on your block. It will look different to mine obviously because you've done a different type of curve. Then I want you just to measure the length of the existing curve, the two angles that you had. So my existing was 7.8 centimetres and my new curved line, let's have a look at what that is now. Just walking my tape measure along as per usual. So my new curved line is 7.5 centimetres. So the difference is just 0.3 centimetres. Now that doesn't sound like much and you could probably ease it in between the two, but effectively what we've done by just curving that bit there is we've actually shortened the length of this by 0.3 centimetres. For you obviously it will be something different, so just make a note of that. So effectively this line is now going to be shorter than the one it's being sewn into. So grab a piece of paper and pop it underneath the pattern that you have been drawing. And what we want to do is to basically extend this line by the amount, the difference that you've lost. So for me, I've lost just 3 millimeters. So I'm just going to mark that down this line here. I'm then going to draw in my new waistline from my side seam to that point. And likewise with this line here, I'm just going to continue it down. So it's not a massive big change, it's just making sure that we're looking at these tiny little alterations because that will all massively affect the fit. And obviously I don't know what type of curve you've done on your bodice block, and your bodice block will look different to mine. So that technique might be really useful for you, especially if you're adding in more than like 5 mil or you've lost more than 5 mil as a result of creating that curve. The only other thing that we need to do is we just need to relocate this notch so it's down by whatever the distance was that you dropped the waistline by. So for me that was just 3 millimeters. So I'm going to drop this notch line by 3 millimeters. Just going to put a little one next to that and a little one next to this. And this is my second notch up here. Wonderful. So that should all work together really nicely now. Now that we have drawn up our block and we've made the alterations we need for our princess fit, we're going to add some tracing paper onto that and add our seam allowances. Starting up at the top, add your seam allowance to this first pattern piece at the shoulder seam. And then we also want to add it to the side here. Drawing your waist up, following your waistline. We're not adding a seam allowance here. Trace over your centre front line exactly as it is because we'll be cutting that on the fold. And likewise with your neckline, we're just going to trace around it. Moving on to our other pattern piece, we're going to repeat that process of adding the seam allowance to the shoulder seam. And then I want you just to mark off a couple of points around this new curve at 1.5 centimetres so that you can draw that in really nicely. Add your 1.5 centimetre seam allowance to this seam as well. And then make sure that you follow your new waist angle so that it's going from the side seam, following your new dropped line for your waist. Add your 1.5 centimetre seam allowance to your side seam and then just trace around your armscye. We now need to annotate our two front bodice pattern pieces. First thing to do is to note that we're going to be placing this one on the fold. Our grain line is just going to nice and neatly follow our centre front line. The next little bit of annotation that we need to do is to annotate these two notches that we created. That's our first one. This is our centre front bodice and it's the princess seam pattern piece, and we're going to cut one on the fold. Actually, what I should have noted was that we could probably put a notch where our apex is as well. And don't forget, it's a good idea just to mark that on your pattern piece as well. Okay, right, moving on now, we'll look at this side over here. So our grain line follows the original centre front, side front bodice, princess seam, cut 2. And then the final thing to do is just to annotate where our notches are. We've got one there, got one that runs right next to the apex, which is there, and another one down here. Brilliant. Once you've done that, then do the same process with your bodice back pattern piece by adding the seam allowances to your block. Add a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance to the centre back. Draw in your waist and dart exactly as it is on the block. Add a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance to your side seam and then draw in your arm side exactly as it is. Add a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance to your shoulders and draw in your dart. Draw in your neckline. Grain line follows the line of the centre back. Annotate your pattern piece to say that it is the back bodice we need to cut to, and then add your pattern name. Once you have cut out your pattern pieces out of tracing paper, you can go and cut them out of your fabric, making sure that you transfer all your notches and also all your dart lines so that we know how to sew those up in the next step. So we have all of our pattern pieces here now, we've cut them all out. We're going to start by sewing up the darts on the back bodice. Now, if you've not done this before or you're unfamiliar with how to sew up darts, please go and refer to our video number 22 where we talk all about how to sew up your bodice block. And in that video we explain really clearly how to sew up darts specifically, so do take a look at that. I'm just going to sew up my 4 darts now. I've already marked on my dart location, so I'm just going to pin those in place. Once you've pinned all your 4 darts on your back pattern piece, you can then go and just sew them up. Once you've sewn your 2 back pattern pieces, you can then press those darts towards the side seams. Now what we've got here is our centre front bodice piece, which is this one here, and we want to attach our side front bodice to this one. Don't forget that you've added your little notches here, so they should line up beautifully. So let's pin that in place together now. Now on the calico, it's hard to see which is right side and which is wrong side. So whichever side is your right side, have that facing up on the table to start off with, and then just with right sides together, flip them over so that you've got right sides together as you pin along the seam. Now this is a curved seam, so it will need a bit of easing in as we stitch it, but I'm just going to align the tops of my pattern pieces and my notches to start off with, because they're going to give me a really nice little reference as to how the rest of this curve should then sit. Lovely, so we've got one side pinned in, and then with right sides together we'll just do the same with this side over here. Brilliant. We're now just going to sew that in place from the top all the way down to the bottom, and we'll use our standard 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Wonderful. Okay, so what we've got here now is a really nice curve, isn't it? And what we might want to do is just snip out the tension a little bit, so you can grab your scissors. Just because there's a little bit of a curve, there's a little bit of tension around here, so just snip that out. Lovely, that should help it sit nice and flat. At this point we're just going to press the seams towards the side. Beautiful. Okay, so now we've pressed our seams, we are now going to sew the side and the shoulder seams together. So right sides together, pin one side seam and then pin the shoulder seam. Repeat that process with right sides together on the other side as well. Pinning the side seam first and then the shoulder seam. Make sure that you're pressing and pinning those shoulder darts towards the arm side and towards the side of the garment. Once you've pinned those 4 sides, we're now going to sew each of them using our 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Once you've sewn those seams, just go and press open those seams, each and every one of them, and then let's go and try it on. So here she is, our princess seam top that we've just drafted beautifully. I really love how this is such a simple effect. Just by removing the volume of the darts and creating those 3 panels across the front, we've just got a really lovely, elegant solution. As I said at the beginning, this is a really complementary design, and don't forget that you could use this technique and take the curve of the darts to the arm side rather than to the shoulders, just using a similar technique, rotating the dart round a little bit further to start off with. So there you have it. So that concludes our princess seam dart alteration video. That is a great little technique how to merge those 2 darts together to create a panel effect. please do update your versions of your body block and your dart manipulations that you've been doing, and do share those with the community. Join in the conversation all about pattern drafting. This is such a fantastic skill to learn, and it's really encouraging to see where other people are at in their journey and what they're creating, not only for us here at Minerva, but also for the wider sewing community. I hope you've really enjoyed that today. Thank you for joining me. I've been Izzy at Minerva, and I will see you next time.